This week on This is America and the World, we continue our conversation with 4 area university sociologists: American, George Washington, Catholic, and Georgetown. We're here to talk about America, who we are, how America is changing, and what our future may be.
Not only because nobody wants to be associated with those comments, but also because it's bad for business, right? But yet we still see we see huge issues associated with inequality, with structural inequality, with race, with high levels of poverty. Yep. We see a school to prison pipeline in a lot of Black and Latino communities, and that issue is about race, and that's issue. So these structural issues, when they're so heavily divided along racial and ethnic lines, it continues to be about race, and it continues to be about structural discrimination or institutionalized discrimination.
Dr. Loewen, you have been involved in this field for 20-some years?
50.
50 years. Oh, 20 years. 20 years. No, 20 years up at Vermont.
At the University of Vermont.
At University of Vermont.
Yeah.
Now at Catholic. How do you see it? This business
I've got a couple
of
of specific comments to make. One is when we talk about structural racism and problems of poverty and so on, it's all too easy for white folks, of which I am one, to basically make that that's just excusing Black folks for their failings. Let me make a couple comments about white folks in this context. I was in a county in Illinois, Calhoun County, north of St. Louis, when right around the time President Obama took office the first time. So that'd be 6 years ago. Calhoun County was then, and as far as I know, remains a sundown county. That is to say, it is all white on purpose. No Black family lives in Calhoun County, or did then, and that would be prudent. Okay, people have been actually killed for being in Calhoun County after dark as recently as the 1950s, possibly the 1960s. Okay? There are many such counties and towns in the United States. I wrote a book called Sundown Towns about them. That's pretty overt racism. Calhoun County voted for Obama 52-47, exactly as did the United States, same percentage. And yet, no Black family can live in the county. So that's one paradox. And Black folks have nothing to do with that paradox in that this is an all-white county. And the other thing I would comment on is, yesterday I flew back here from Minnesota, and in the seat pocket in front of me was the Sky Mall catalog. This is the most widely distributed. Everybody who's flown on an airplane knows, it's a catalog of catalogs. It's got Haverhills, it's got Sharper Image, it's got all kinds of things. But it don't got no Black folks. If you look at the models using the products, typically there's 100 to 350 pictures, that's my unit, of models using products. And typically 0 to maybe 3 of them are light-skinned African Americans. This is no more than 1%. And there's not even any Latinos. And you might say, how do I know? Well, they're all blondes. They're not brunettes even. So this is a racist catalog, if you will. Now, as you were pointing out, it's racism without racist. That is, I don't think the head of the company, never mind her name, sits there and says, how can I screw race relations in the United States today? I know, I'll make another racist catalog. I don't think so. I think what happens is each company is putting in 2 or 3 photos, right? And each photo has 2 or 3 people, and so they're putting in a total of 7 people maybe, and they don't see any need to include a Black person. And then your company does it, and your company does it, and pretty soon you have 300 photos, and none of them are of Black people. What does this mean? 2 things right off the bat. It means Black folks can't be a model, or at least not for that catalog. So it just literally discriminates them out of the profession. And number 2, everybody reading it, like me, or in the seats, even including Black folks, doesn't see Black folks using mountaineering equipment, or ringing a doorbell that rings all over your house, or jumping on a trampoline, all the different things. Black folks don't do those things, which helps us, non-Blacks, otherwise them.
Well, I mean,
Dr. Pascale is up, but I got to take a little break. So just say to the folks at home, sociologists, they study behavior, don't they? Is that pretty much what you do? What would you say, huh? Behaviors, trends,
we study society.
Society, there we go. So I was in there someplace. From 4 area leading universities, from Catholic University, George Washington, American University, Georgetown, and we're just taking a look at America. The title of the program is This is America and the World, so we're focusing this program on how they all see America. So sit tight, This is America and the World.
This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and the F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. ANA, Japan's largest airline with an extensive network throughout Asia. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology, sharing tomorrow. The Republic of Kazakhstan, a rich history and a future of development and growth. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.
Dr. Pascale.
Thank you. I wanted to build on your comments, because the people who are selecting those ads are, I would bet my salary on it, are predominantly white. And that, as one of the ways that whiteness reproduces itself is exactly by that, by what counts as ordinary, not people sitting around necessarily deciding an evil strategy, but of learning to value only the interests, needs, and presence of other white people.
It just comes naturally.
So, well, it's learned to come. We learn it to come naturally.
Yes.
Yes.
Very good, because I didn't really mean that.
And so that element of white privilege is really fundamental to the kinds of racism. Claude Still's work on microaggressions, the institutional racism, and Eduardo Bonilla Silva's work on racism without racists, and Tim Weiss, Racism 2.0. There's a lot of work being done on the fact that white people need to step to the fact that we benefit from systems of racism, whether it's institutional or interactional, historical.
Give me an example.
Well, I could live in those counties that other people wouldn't be able to live at. When I apply for a job, I don't have to worry that maybe the way my name is or the way that I might present on a CV might give people wonder, oh, is she going to fit in here culturally? Or I just look like the person that they, oh, of course, this is somebody at my table, right?
Well, I'll give you probably like an even more sort of, I don't know, everyday occurrence, right? I mean, so when we think about college admissions, right, I think one of the most sort of controversial policies that most private and many public institutions use is that of affirmative action. And we see affirmative action as somehow unfairly benefiting people of color, right? Well, if you want to talk about white privilege and what white privilege does in terms of the admissions process, I mean, we don't need to look much further than sort of the policy of legacy admissions, right? I mean, historically, the vast majority of people who have gone to university in this country have been white, right? And so if your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents went to certain institutions, you have a leg up over other people, right? And your whiteness is part of what allows you that leg up. And I think it's actually very, very fascinating that people have absolutely no problem with policies of legacy admissions.
You know, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think what we're really getting at here is you just mentioned the issue of privilege. And it's not just white privilege, but we also see class privilege. We see heteronormativity. We see various forms of privilege that are consistently underplayed. And I think that's one of the hardest concepts for a lot of students new to sociology to really wrap their head around, this idea of privilege. Because nobody wants to be told that, you know what, my parents worked really hard to get where I am today. And it's really hard for people to recognize. And the easiest way to describe privilege is akin to running the 100-meter dash with a 20-yard start or a 20-meter start. And it's hard for students to really wrap their head around that idea of concept, because nobody wants to be told that they don't deserve to be where they are today because of hard work, their family.
Let me just, sorry, did I jump in on the last few words of your thought? Do we all agree that there's a kind of a changing face in America right now? Is that a fair thing to
Sure.
say?
You mean demographic face?
Yeah.
Definitely.
But at the same time, there are people who are so threatened by that. They're so trying to hold on. I think what I see here, and maybe I don't know if Washington is a good example, but young people are much more tolerant and accepting on every conceivable level. So I'm hoping that it's the young people that will change it.
I don't know. I'd be a little careful about that. And
Okay.
you know, and so just thinking about culture and popular culture, right? You know, I have children, and you know, and there are the shows on the children's television shows. I'm not going to advertise them here. And you know, what's very astounding to me is on almost all of these shows,
Yep.
there are and almost every episode there are instances where there's slang that is used. Right,
Yeah.
that's slang from the ghetto, and it's ghetto slang,
Yep.
and it's supposed to be used to indicate something, either hipness or it's used for comic effect, right? And so, yeah, you have young kids who are like, oh, I don't discriminate against people, and yet they use language, right, that I think, number one, denigrates the real lived experiences of people who live in communities not like their own, right? And number two, if I hear the word ghetto thrown around loosely by another young person, again, to characterize someone as being low class or someone as being, you know, unintelligent, etc., I mean, that's acceptable. That's acceptable slang among young people, right? So I think we have at once this idea that young people are much more accepting and open, but they still carry sort of the baggage of these ideas.
So you mentioned television programs, and I was thinking about in our culture that so much of the films we see, the programs we watch on television, the music is often very explosive, exploitive, and explicit in the language, and I think that plays into our culture. I mean, all you have to do is look at the movies that people go to see, and they're, you know.
People, I guess, want to see them, right?
But I always say, what does that say about us?
I wanted to come back to a couple of points that were made earlier, if that would be all right, because I think that the idea, what I've seen on college campuses, and this might be your experiences as well, that racially themed parties have come back. Yeah. So that
never went away.
While there has been, I think there are definitely promising moments when you look at any generation. You'd have to be silly not to be able to see the promise of that generation, that in some ways they grow past all of us, and that's a great thing. But we have to recognize as well that this work of racism is ours to clean up, not theirs. And a lot of times that guidance for how to do that is really missing. So when we talk about...
Whose job would that be?
I think that getting rid of racism is a white person's job. That white people have benefited from it, we continue to benefit from it, and that it's up to us. And it kind of cycles back to the question you asked about happiness. Because when I talk to my students about privilege, my white students will say, I'm not privileged, I'm really unhappy. Because we conflate, you know, being privileged with being happy.
Oh, yeah.
It's two different
It's
things.
really different.
I can tell you as a white person, I've been severely unhappy on occasion too.
Well, even if you think about privilege, this is America and the world, right? 20% of the world's people, 20% of the world's population consume 80% of the world's resources. So when we talk about equality, it isn't about everybody having the same. There's not enough. Some of us have too much. And so when we think about how to create equality, it means we have to think about how to live with less so that others can live with more.
But back to Doctor's point right at the beginning of the program, we're kind of a consumer-driven, wanting more. That's part of our DNA right now.
That's what drives our economy.
That's what drives the economy.
Let me throw in something from my experience at the University of Vermont. And I think you folks teach at even more expensive schools, but the University of Vermont.
Yeah, but you have nice weather up there.
Yeah.
It's a simpler lifestyle, isn't it?
Right.
You didn't buy that.
The
Go ahead.
University of Vermont, when I was there, and I think still, was the most expensive state school in the United States, had the highest in-state tuition and the highest out-of-state tuition. And as a result, and this is a conclusion, it had the richest students, or the students from the richest family backgrounds of any state school in the United States. Well, so I found these folks to be very difficult sociology students in a way, because I think the key insight that sociology has to offer, I can sum it up in this sentence: social structure pushes people around, influences their careers, and even affects how they think. Okay? Now, my Vermont students could write that down with the best of them, but when I asked them to apply that idea to, for example, why are they at the University of Vermont? They're at the University of Vermont because they push social structure around. They're smart. I used to give the Boy Scout law really fast, a bunch of individual attributes that are all glowing, and that's why I'm at the University of Vermont. No concept that it would have been a real wrench for them to say to mommy and daddy in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., I'm not going to go to college, or I'm not going to go to an upper middle class college, I'm going to go to community college. That would have been violating a norm. So the idea then, the problem then is that although these students, as you implied, I think they are better on race with the problems we've noted, they're not any better at all on social class. And I think our society is widening in its social class. A lot of people think our society is widening in its social class income differentials. And we're also seeing suburbs that are going up now. You can see a whole suburb that every house is $500,000 to $595,000. That means there's not even a school teacher lives there, let alone a carpenter. And so they all become they all become otherized. You have them come in to teach your kids, or you have them come in to fix your plumbing. But we are stockbrokers, we are lawyers, we are upper middle class professionals. That's what I worry about, replacing race almost.
So when we talk about race and class and inequity, I'm not so sure, and I keep thinking that the inequity word doesn't frame it quite so people can grab a hold of. It's kind of like, it's America. You deserve to start your own business, be as successful as possible, make as much money as you possibly can.
But some of us have more opportunities to do
opportunity,
that.
That's great. That's great.
Equality of opportunity.
Equality of opportunity. So is that not, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I would love to reframe it in words that people can grab a hold of. Equity and inequity is just not cutting it with me, at least, but equality of opportunity is terrific.
I don't have a nice soundbite like that. I think that is very useful phrase. But if you think about, you go to the store and buy a head of lettuce or any piece of produce, you don't think about who picked that. And the migrant workers who are living in hideous conditions on unbearable, you can hardly even call them wages when people struck to get 2 cents a pound for a ton of tomatoes. It's just, anyway, I'm sorry, I get very agitated about this. So if we paid the value of their work, we would pay a whole heck of a lot more for that head of lettuce. So part of what happens to us is that we don't really, part of that privilege is that we are not paying the cost, the true cost. So when we get oil or natural gas, we're not paying for how the environment is destroyed or how to rebuild the environment. We don't pay people the wage that they need to be able to live in a decent home and raise their children and give them those equal opportunities.
Well, go ahead, Doctor.
I was just going to say, and going back to kind of push it a little further, thinking about the person who picked that head of lettuce, it's very likely, it's probable that that person was unauthorized and was willing to die, essentially, crossing the border, southern Arizona, parts of South Texas, in order at a chance of trying to make something a little bit better for themselves and their family. So not only is that person living and working in horrible conditions, but they're literally willing to put their life on the line to help like we say in Spanish, para sacar adelante la familia, to make your to be able to get your family ahead. So I think we need to really start looking at this in more global terms, right? So we know that inequality is increasing in the United States. But inequality has grown at a much faster pace around the world, and a lot of this has to do with increased globalization and multinational corporations that are going into countries and systematically underdeveloping a lot of these countries. And so when we think about the issue of migration, we need to realize that people are just they're responding to the redistribution of of resources on a global level, and so it makes perfect sense that people are willing to come here and work in those conditions, and willing to put their lives on the line. We just have to look at it in a bigger global context.
Two little corollaries from that. Of course, if they're illegal, they're not likely to get involved in unionizing because they're in a shaky situation already. And the second point I'd make, though, is I'm not so sure that if we paid the lettuce pickers a living wage, that we'd have to pay a whole heck of a lot more. I think it's doable. I worry that somebody may pick up on what you said and say, well, I don't want to pay a whole heck of a lot more, so let's just keep it the way it is. I think I think we'd be a much happier country if we had a somewhat more compressed social class system. A lot of other countries have a social, you asked about happiness, have a somewhat more compressed social class system. I think they do better. We're paying about 15% of our GNP just about now for healthcare, including healthcare lawyers. And are we getting better healthcare than, say, Canada, which is paying maybe 9.5%? I don't think so. So I think in a lot of cases, we can engineer our society to be more just, and it won't cost us all that much. I think we'll be happier in the long run.
I want to go back to equality of opportunity. How do we even begin to create that?
Well, I mean, supposedly, the sort of myth of, sort of attaining the American dream for a very long time has been through the promise of education, right? You go to school, you work hard in school, you do well, and in school, then you do well in life. Well, I mean, from the very beginning, for a significant portion of black and brown kids around this country, right, they try, but they don't. I mean, from the first day that they walk through the school room doors, they've already been put at a disadvantage, right? And it's not simply because of the things that you have some researchers tell you, which is that, well, they come into school and they know fewer words than their white counterparts. Well, if that's the case, we could have universal pre-K, and that would work to actually help to diminish that gap, right? But, if we actually had schools that worked, quality schools within these communities, whatever it was they were lacking before they came to school, we should be seeing growth. And what we are seeing is that gaps actually grow every single year of school, right, between black and brown kids and their white counterparts, right? So our schools are not doing very much to level the playing field at all, and not even level the playing field, but to actually even give that opportunity to the majority of black and brown children in this country. And so then when you turn it around and say, well, we all worked hard, well, you know what? Those kids tried to work hard as well, right?
And I think the problem is compounded in public schools with zero tolerance policies. I mean, we see a lot of public schools that are literally a school to prison pipeline. These zero tolerance policies, if a kid, brings something to school they shouldn't have brought, if they get in a fight, if they're taken out or they're sent to detention, or it's starting the criminalization process at a very young age. And so it's no surprise that we're seeing kids, being pushed out of these institutions and going straight into correctional facilities. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with some serious concerns that we should all have with mass incarceration.
So here we are now with education is key, and also the opportunity for good education. And my fear is that in some of our major cities, that the kids just don't even have a shot. I mean, they really, really are placed in very difficult situations.
I think there's some positive trends going on.
Okay.
One of them is increasingly controversial, which is maybe too bad, and that is this new emphasis on what's called the Common Core. I think the Common Core standards, which are not federal but have been agreed to by all kinds of different states, do offer hope for education that is more in depth and that emphasizes creative thinking and critical thinking and is not just test driven. There's a whole lot of reasons why standardized tests are unfair to racial minorities and poor kids, and limiting their futures on the basis of test scores is even more unfair. So that's one advantage, one thing that's going on.
We're at the end of our time.
Oops.
Can you believe?
Just when I was going to come up with my second thing.
No,
That's good.
One was good. One was good. We'll take one. Thank you all very much for a very, very enlightening conversation, and you all lived up to the idea that we had for the show of bringing you together to talk about America. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good.
For information about This Is America and the World and online video for all of our programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net. And now you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This Is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and the F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. ANA, Japan's largest airline with an extensive network throughout Asia. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. The Republic of Kazakhstan, a rich history and a future of development and growth. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.